The year is 1947. The air in Delhi, Lahore and Calcutta is thick with the dust of a long, hot summer, with the scent of jasmine and marigolds, but also with the metallic smell of fear. The British Empire, exhausted by war and its own slow decay, is preparing to leave. After centuries of rule, the crown would depart, and in its wake two new nations would be born, India and Pakistan. This was a moment of immense hope, a dream of freedom finally realized for hundreds of millions. But it was also a time of profound anxiety, a great unknown that whispered of division, displacement, and violence. Neighbors who had shared festivals and sorrows for generations now look at each other with a flicker of uncertainty. Political speeches blare from radios promising a glorious future while drawing new lines on ancient lands. Families gather in quiet courtyards, their conversations hushed. They speak of staying, of leaving, of what to pack and what to leave behind. A life's worth of belongings, memories and relationships must be weighed against the promise of safety. The railways, the great steel arteries of the subcontinent, are already beginning to groan under the strain of a population on the move. Rumors spread like wildfire, tales of violence in distant villages fanning the flames of mistrust. In this cauldron of hope and dread, the stage is set for one of the largest and most tragic migrations in human history. The world is watching, unaware of the storm about to break. This was a time of great men: Gandhi, Nehru, Jinnah. Their names were on the lips of everyone, their visions shaping the future. They wrestled with impossible choices, trying to steer their people through turbulent waters. Away from the clamor of the streets, in a heavily guarded compound outside Bangalore, a different kind of revolution was humming to life. It was not a revolution of politics, but of logic, of vacuum tubes and wires. This was the home of Sifr. The name, derived from the Arabic word for zero, was a nod to India's ancient contribution to mathematics. Sifr was not a sleek device of silicon and light. It was a behemoth, a colossal machine that filled an entire hall, its walls lined with thousands of glowing vacuum tubes that pulsed with a soft, warm light. The air smelled of ozone and hot metal, a constant hum filling the space like a mechanical mantra. Sifr was born from the crucible of the Second World War, a secret project initiated by a visionary group of Indian mathematicians and physicists who had worked alongside minds like Alan Turing. They fed it data through clattering teleprinters, inputting census records, economic reports, weather patterns, and intercepted communications. It was a slow, laborious process, a conversation between man and machine conducted on long reels of paper tape. The machine's purpose was simple yet profound. It was designed to predict, to sift through the chaos of human society and find the underlying logic. Could a machine, a thinking engine made of glass and steel, help prevent the impending catastrophe? The government, initially skeptical, was now desperate. With reports of unrest growing daily, leaders like Nehru and Sardar Patel were willing to listen to any idea that offered a glimmer of hope. They visited the Bangalore facility, walking through the echoing hall, their faces illuminated by the machine's blinking lights. To them, it was almost magical, a strange new form of intelligence that offered not opinions, but cold, hard calculations. The work began immediately. Teams of clerks worked around the clock, feeding Sifr every piece of information they could find. They input detailed demographic data from every district, town, and village. The machine hummed and clicked, its vacuum tubes glowing hot as it absorbed the story of a subcontinent on the verge of tearing itself apart. It was building a living model of India, a digital twin made of numbers and statistics. The first outputs were staggering. The teleprinters began to chatter, spitting out maps marked with color-coded warnings. Sifr predicted the exact routes where migrating columns would be most vulnerable to attack. Armed with this knowledge, the interim government began to act. The army was not deployed randomly. It was sent to the precise flashpoints identified by the machine, securing vulnerable railway lines and roadways. Food and medical supplies were not sent to major cities, but were stockpiled along the predicted refugee routes. Sifr even helped plan the logistics, creating optimized schedules for trains, ensuring they were moving people to places that could support them. The chaos was still immense, but it was no longer completely blind. The impact was immediate and profound. Where history tells of trains arriving silent and full of the dead, Sifr's intervention meant many more arrived safely. Refugee camps, planned with Sifr's projections on sanitation and resource needs, were still crowded and difficult, but they avoided the catastrophic outbreaks of cholera and dysentery that could have been. The partition was still painful. It still involved the heartbreak of leaving one's home, but the scale of the violence, the the sheer number of lives lost in the crossfire of hatred and fear was drastically reduced. Sifr had not erased the tragedy, but it had steered it away from the abyss. The world, still recovering from its own global conflict, took notice. At first, the reports coming out of India seemed too good to be true. Diplomats and journalists had been predicting a bloodbath of unprecedented proportions. Whispers began to circulate in the corridors of power in Washington and Moscow. How were the fledgling governments of India and Pakistan managing this crisis so effectively? The secret of Sifr could not be kept for long. The United States, just beginning its Cold War chess match with the Soviet Union, saw Sifr as both a marvel and a threat. A thinking machine had emerged not from the labs of MIT or Caltech, but from a former British colony. The Soviet Union reacted with a mixture of public scorn and private urgency. Publicly, their propaganda dismissed Sifr as a capitalist trick. Privately, Stalin and his inner circle were deeply alarmed. The race to develop their own thinking machine began in earnest. A new front in the Cold War fought not with spies and soldiers, but with mathematicians and engineers. The global balance of power was being recalibrated. For the new nations of India and Pakistan, Sifr became an unexpected tool of diplomacy. They held the keys to a technology that the world's superpowers desperately wanted. This gave them a seat at the table they might not have had otherwise. Delegations from around the globe came to Bangalore, not to offer aid, but to ask for knowledge. The subcontinent, for centuries a subject of colonial power, was suddenly a center of technological innovation. The Sifr revolution was not just about managing a crisis, it was about changing the perception of where the future was being built. It was a new kind of independence. The long-term impact of Sifr rippled out far beyond the events of 1947. Having proven its worth in a time of crisis, the machine was woven into the fabric of the new nations, helping plan agricultural reforms and design efficient industrial layouts. This early start changed the course of technological history. The AI revolution did not begin in Silicon Valley in the late 20th century. It began in Bangalore in the 1940s. India and Pakistan became the world's leaders in computing and artificial intelligence. Their universities became magnets for the brightest minds on the planet. Instead of a brain drain to the West, there was a global pilgrimage of scientists to the East. The digital age dawned with the diverse languages and scripts of the subcontinent encoded in its foundational logic. Of course, this new age was not without its own challenges. Ethical debates raged. How much should society rely on the predictions of a machine? Was it right to let an emotionless entity guide decisions about human lives and livelihoods? A new kind of philosophy emerged, one that grappled with the relationship between human intuition and artificial logic. People both revered and feared the thinking machines, seeing them as both saviors and potential masters. The story of humanity's relationship with AI began decades earlier, shaped by the unique cultural and spiritual context of South Asia. In the end, the story of Sifr is a testament to how a single innovation, introduced at a critical moment, can alter the flow of history. The Partition of 1947 remains a pivotal event, a moment of sorrow and freedom. But in this version of the past, it is also something else, a genesis. It is the moment when humanity, faced with a crisis of its own making, turned to a new kind of intelligence for help. The legacy of Sifr is not just in the lives it saved, but in the different world it created. A world where the future arrived ahead of schedule, born from the pain and promise of a subcontinent finding its freedom.